Welcome everybody to the After Dark Show. I'm Don Rogers. I'm really excited to have tonight's guest on. Her name is Emily Moyer, and I first saw her on BG Cast, and her and Steven had one of those conversations that just had me on the edge of my seat. And so much of what she was talking about really resonated in what you guys have heard me talk about and the things I've been discovering over the last year and a half. And so much of her information coincides and really complements everything I've been looking into, and I'm just really excited to talk to her. So I'm going to bring her on stage right now, and I'm just really excited to talk to her. So I'm going to bring her on stage right now, and there's feedback. Really excited to talk to her. So
Somehow we have feedback.
I'm going to bring her on stage right now, and
I don't think it's on my
there's
end.
feedback. What I got going on here? Hold on.
I don't think it's on my end.
Oh my god. 16 people, and I am having the funniest freaking show. Yeah, it's on. Aurora says it's on her end. So this is going to be a very good show once everything starts going the way it's supposed to be, and I appreciate your guys' patience. So, yeah. Or as Spin just said in the kitchen, it's the fucking, and it happens almost every show. Like when I had Michael Cameron on, my whole laptop, like the one that's right beside me that I no longer use, froze, and I was never able to use it for a podcast again. Like the whole screen just froze up and it was done. Oh, Aurora's loving the fucking.
I got it.
Okay, we are rocking.
So I think what happened. Oh, we still have a little. What's happening? Okay. I was right.
Yeah. Okay, back to the fucking. Emily still has an echo. Thank you. And thank you everybody for coming. I know most of you are likely Emily's people. There's a few of mine already. Aurora, always awesome to see you. And if you guys haven't watched the conversation we had, holy shit, go watch it because it was awesome. And she's actually coming back in a month. I got it my phone somewhere. But yeah, so we're gonna break the internet when we talk to Aurora, so there's always that, you know. And we're gonna talk about fairies and that kind of fun stuff. Don't you just hate that, Emily? Yeah. Aurora. Boom, yeah, the conversation. Let's break this shit. Yes. Oh dear. I just had some. Thank you very much. I have some very interesting material, and not all of it is a complete shit show like this. So you're definitely. I think I'm on 70 total episodes now, somewhere like that. So yeah. Okay, she is back, and we're gonna do it.
Are we doing it?
I think we're good.
All right.
The fucking is over.
No, there's still an echo.
Oh shit! Can you mute your playback? I don't know.
My play. I don't have the playback on anymore. That's what it was before. I've looked at every window to see what's happening. And yeah, I'm not in YouTube or anything else. I've never used Chrome before, so I don't know if it's because something's there.
If you want to go back to your original browser, we'll try that again, and because now you've got your mic working.
My mic, I didn't use my mic. Changed when I went to the browser. I'll try again.
Yeah. Oh dear. The fucking continues. I don't even think I'm gonna edit this part out of the audio because it just makes it one of my interviews. You know, it really is. It's just the way shit goes with me sometimes. Like I've had complete freeze ups on camera. I've had complete mind gaps on camera. And I'll ask everybody in the audience, do you guys ever get that where you're like right in the middle of the thought? You can even be talking and you'll just blank out. Or like is that some MK Ultra shit or like
Too much weed.
or too much weed, you know?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We still have that though.
Shit.
I've never had this happen before.
I'm gonna do one more thing. I'm gonna switch back to old school. I'm gonna pop off the laptop
Okay.
and I will go to my phone. Maybe it's mine. I don't know.
If it was mine, I should have still been hearing you.
Yeah.
Even when I was off.
Yeah. So, Enter Studio. Okay.
Let's see. Yay!
All right. You guys are going to have to look at my weird curtains and shit, but just give me a minute. We'll get this shit figured out yet. All right. So there is already 22 people here, and we're live.
That was the smoothest entrance I've ever had into a show, so this is going to be an awesome show.
Oh, yeah. This is going great.
Nice to meet you, Don.
Very nice to meet you too, Emily. So like I was saying, I first got to see you, and I actually commented a couple of times when you were on Steven's show, and you covered a lot of really cool information. But I'm gonna do what most guys do and ask you for like, what was the moment, the catalyst, the point where you realized, something's not quite the way we're told it is, something's not quite right in this reality?
Well, like I've had many of them, throughout the course of my life, and each one was like an initiation to the next layer of the mystery. But I'd say probably like super young, right? Like probably like 2 or 3, maybe, right? And then maybe again like 5, 6 or 7. I definitely was always the kid who felt like there was what like you thought was going on, and that there was what was really going on, and they weren't the same. Right. I always felt like my parents were like aware of some reality that I was sort of participating in, but that they weren't telling me about. And I don't know if that is true or not. Right. I don't know that, like, I don't know how aware of sort of behind the curtain activities my parents actually were. But I remember as a child feeling like my parents were telling me lies, and I'm not saying that they were, right, but that there was something that they were leaving out. And so but for me, like, I was not raised in a religious or a spiritual household, so there was never any conversation about like God or anything like that. And so I didn't have like this metaphysical sense of the world in the way that like a child raised with religion might have. So for me, anything that felt like it was going on outside of my ability to see it fell under the sort of idea of like conspiracy or sort of machinations that other people were doing, not against me, but without my knowledge. And as I got older and I understood that, like, oh, like you cannot be religious and there can still be like on some level an invisible realm or some sort of metaphysics that is happening outside of your normal visual field, and that maybe that's what I was sensing. And then, I struggled growing up. I was weird. I was a gymnast. The kids I went to school with didn't really understand that. I didn't do the social things. And, I always liked more adult stuff. I think we lost Dawn. I'll just keep talking, I guess. I always liked more adult stuff. And so that separated me from the other kids. Dawn is back, or it looks like he is. There you are.
Sorry about that. I got booted out of my own show again. That was crazy.
No, I was just saying, like I was weird. I liked more like adult things than the other kids did. So there was always like a separation between myself and like the other children on some level. And so I had an active sort of internal, mental, and an imaginary world. And then I think, I had not a very like successful attempt at going away to college. And that led me into, even though I had always been like a good girl on some level, that led me into drug use. And I started to recognize that there was like other stuff. And then I had just a really strange year. And then like in the late 90s, I started going to raves, and that was like a whole other, layer of the cake. And then the big one though that sort of led me to the space that is why I'm here talking with you tonight, is that in 2005 I sort of had a bunch of things happen simultaneously, including my stepbrother dying in a like a sort of unexpected and tragic way while I was taking a class at school. I had gone back to school, and the class at school was called the Sociology of Drug Use, and it introduced me to the work of Gary Webb and the Dark Alliance and the whole Iran Contra crack cocaine thing, and that was where I learned about like the government creates the problem so it can have the solution and all of that kind of stuff. And I was also the term MK Ultra was brought to my awareness, which triggered all sorts of things that don't seem like they would be normal if, like, I've never had that response to anything else that was sort of taught to me in a class. And that began my dig. And I have been digging and digging and digging ever since. And I've been down most rabbit holes, spelunked from one rabbit hole to the other rabbit hole. I'm very familiar with the inner architecture of said rabbit holes, and have been doing it now for more than 20 years as a researcher. And then in 2016, I was a guest on Randy Moggen's Off Planet Radio, and then became the producer and the co-host of that show. And the rest is history. I've been blabbing my mouth on YouTube and podcasts ever since.
That is quite the interesting awakening story. And you touched on a couple of things. And one of them is the whole bringing in of the crack and stuff. There really was a movement where basically natural medicines were deemed as bad, and all of a sudden we had heroin and we had crack and and like a lot of people don't realize where that actually came from.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a little extra here. So, when I was in my year of struggling to, oh no, I find myself alone again. We'll wait for him to come back because I think he wants to hear this. Hopefully, it'll be quick. Hope everyone's having a good evening. I'm sorry it's a little bumpy, a little bit of a bumpy ride tonight. Here he is. We've got the spinning white circle. And
This is, I am so sorry. This is fucking ridiculous. I've never had this much interference.
I can't say that I've any time recently either. This stuff used to happen back in like 2016, 2017, but we'll roll with it. So anyway, in 1995, I guess it was 1995, I was struggling to accept the end of my gymnastics career, and that college hadn't worked out for me. And I was coaching gymnastics, and sounds crazy, but like one of the parents of a girl that I coached at the gym introduced me to crack cocaine. I had never done any drugs before. And right. And I think I had tried smoking pot once, and I was like, yeah, no, this is not for me. Yeah, so she turned me on to crack cocaine, and I had a wild year of crack cocaine use. This was 10 years before I ever knew about Gary. It was before, 10 years before I ever knew about Gary Webb or any of the crack cocaine relation to Iran Contra. Of course, I'd heard of Iran Contra, but I didn't really understand what that was, right? And I'll actually say this. This is going to sound nuts, but okay. That was the first time it ever occurred to me that there was something else. I was not like a believer in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny as a kid. Like I said, we didn't have religion in my household, but like literally, I remember this so vividly. Like the very first time I ever did crack cocaine, I felt like the songs on the radio were singing to me when I would like go out into the hallway. Like I would felt like I heard somebody call my name, right? And I, it was, but it wasn't in a paranoid way. It was just like my senses were heightened and I could hear every little thing. And I realized there was a lot more things there than sort of what our normal perception band keep us aware of. And so that was shocking to me. I did not expect that was what drugs were based on the programming that we had received in, junior high school and whatever it is, right? And I have to say that I was kind of fascinated with it. And that fascination. All right. Sorry, guys. Let's bring him back. I guess I could open the chat and chat with you guys while he's gone. What are we going to do, Don?
I'm going to check my settings here. Hold on.
All right.
Just give me 1 second. I think my shit's still open, and that's probably the problem. There. Because I was using my phone as my hotspot, so that might be why I kept getting booted.
Okay.
I live in the middle of Alberta, which is pretty much on the map, but fuck nowhere. So, like, when we went to get internet installed, the guy came, looked at the satellite dish, went, "Oh, I'll be right back," and we never heard from them again. They're like, "Nope, this is Hillbilly Town. We're out." So
all right.
Hopefully
so this. I didn't realize you were in Canada.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So okay. Well, then hopefully this will resolve it. So yeah. So actually, crack cocaine was my first portal to the understanding that there is more here than what we see with our normal senses. Wild, huh?
It is, and that's actually something. I have done my fair share of illicit substances myself, and it's really something that you do realize that there's heightened senses of mind in altered states. Like you can, like you were saying, you can hear things, you can sense things. And I know a lot of people call it being cracked out because it does get certain people, and they'll be like peeking out the window every 16 seconds because they've smoked a rock and now they're fucked, right? But there's also exactly what you're saying. There's the auditory, there's the visual. And I do think with
Nope. Okay. I'm going to propose another solution to our friend Dawn here.
I am getting pissed.
All right. Do we have a backup plan? Do we want to switch over to my side? Do we want to try it again another night? I want to be talking to you, not to myself.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, I don't know what to do here. I am so sorry.
No. Whatever you want to do is fine for me. Like, it's not a problem for me. I want to do what works for you, and I want the audience to get a good show. So, what would you like to do?
Do you want to try and send me a link? I don't fucking know here. This is crazy. I've never had this happen this bad before.
So I can send you a link, and we can go on my channel if you want. You want to try that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the guys, I'll send him a link, and then just go over to my channel on YouTube, which is Emily Moyer, just my name. There's a capsule with a DNA strand in it, and we'll be live over there in a few minutes. Okay.
All okay. Right. So sorry, guys, I don't know what's going on.
There it is. All right, guys. You know who I am. This is Don Rogers. I'm supposed to be on his show tonight, but for some reason, his whole setup is acting up. So we decided to come over to my channel and we're going to start over and he's going to interview me. So, Don, whenever you're ready,
And,
take it away.
uh, and it's giving me a really hard time sharing the link out, of course.
Let me see if I can do a Facebook and then let's see.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can make it removed.
This has been the craziest interview I've had so far. So it's going to be a good conversation when you know it's this bothered.
Paste. Let me tag you. Let's go at Don Rogers. There we go. All right. I just tagged you and posted it on Facebook. So you can
Yeah.
grab that. All right. There you go.
All right. It's on Facebook, hon. She's going to share it out for me.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
So
Here we are.
we're on,
Take a deep breath and then we'll go.
we're on Emily Moyer's channel because my entire setup does not want to cooperate tonight. StreamYard kicked me off of my own channel about a half a dozen times. So we got frustrated and came over here. So we're going to do the After Dark show on Emily's channel tonight. So just to refresh, as I had said, I first got to see you on Steven's show, BG Cast, and like just a lot of the information that you came out with was just like ding, 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 just lighting up everything that I've been into lately. And we'll skip over the what was your awakening thing because we already did that. And if you want to go watch the messed up half of an episode that's on my channel, you can hear Emily's awakening story, and it is quite in depth and very intriguing. But we had just gotten into the juicy bits about illicit substances and, you know, going from there, like, because that was actually one of the catalysts of your awakening was your journey into illicit substances. And what I was getting at is like, there is this weird thing where, like, once you get into a certain stage of mind, you do start to perceive different frequencies and things that are around you. And that's what I was saying just before we got cut off is like, you know, sometimes it goes a little far and the person's like a total crackhead and peeking out the window every few seconds. But there is that sweet spot where you can be in the buzz and just observing reality. And what you've discovered in that state is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have done my fair share of illicit substances, and some of them caused a lot of problems for me, and others did not. And it was always that way, right? Like I definitely, like I told you, I had a year hard in the paint with crack cocaine when I was about 20, and then didn't do any hard drugs for a number of years, and then pretty much struggled on and off from the time I was 25 until I was 40 with methamphetamines, right? And I would go long periods of time not using it and then long periods of time using it. And those two substances were problematic for me in the sense that like I became on some level addicted. Now, I observed that what I found intriguing about the substances and what kind of kept me coming back for more or wanting to stay in that space was a little different than a lot of the other people I knew who used the drugs. I was very fascinated with this space where the lines between dimensions were blurred. And I was also quite fascinated with how fast the synapses in my brain were firing, and I was connecting dots and able to sort of penetrate through that like wall of almost understanding but not quite. The other thing, and like I've had conversations with Thomas from Paranoid American about this, one of the things that staying up on drugs, you know, more really with methamphetamine than coke is a little bit different, right? But it allows you to go all the way down to the bottom of the rabbit hole. You can stay up until you're done with your chase, right? You're not like getting tired when you're just getting to the good part and not thinking clearly. I mean, eventually you'll get to a place where you're not thinking clearly. But I was definitely doing different things and pursuing different activities in that headspace than most of the other people I knew who were doing them. And then, sort of separately, but sometimes there was crossover, throughout that period, I was also doing psychedelics, which those drugs never got into overuse for me. And whenever I would do psychedelics, I really clearly understood that like it was really different, right? Like it was a different kind of experience. It was more sort of holistic. There was a more complete set of information. It wasn't just like harping away at this sort of like one idea. It was kind of just a more complete understanding of whatever it was that was being shown to me. And then it was always kind of coming with a message that for many, many years was basically like, in order to understand all of this, you're going to have to stop doing the other stuff because like I was getting this really incredible view of this sort of multi-dimensional, omnidirectional hologram producing something or other of a reality, but I couldn't come back down to earth and explain it in a way that was concise and made sense and was something anybody would care about, right? It was sounded crazy because it was like trying to put that all back together when I wasn't in that state was difficult, you know. And so the psychedelics in some ways acted and sometimes as an annoyed teacher because it took me so long to get off the other stuff. But, you know, once I did, I've been able to press into that space and bring back a lot of information that has led me down some really interesting paths with my research and then my shows, and very rarely delivers me like nonsense information anymore, right? Like before, there would be good stuff, but it'd be mixed in with a lot of nonsense. And sometimes it was hard to separate out the nonsense from the good stuff because it was all interesting and pretty or whatever it was. But yeah, so I had to get my mind straight before I could really understand both the psychedelic experiences, which I still continue to have them occasionally, but even the really good information I actually did get in some of those other, you know, drug hallways, I call them, right? Some of those other spaces, like I recognize now that a lot of the ideas that occurred to me for the first time, you know, when I was on crack cocaine or when I was on meth, are ideas that have, you know, taken me a long way in my pursuit of the truth. Even though like I had to stop doing them to completely understand it, right?
That makes sense. And that's one of the fundamental differences I've picked out listening to you is like with the stimulants, you did come back with some type of information. And with entheogens, a lot of the times they're like, you know everything. And then you come back and you're like, haha, where did it all go? Right. Where you were actually bringing the experience back with you. And that's what I find fascinating about your story is that you were able to bring from that altered state of perception, you were able to bring this information back and then eventually put it into place. And much like you, I heard you mention on Steven's show about driving people fucking nuts with your awakening hat. I thought my family was going to lock me up because mine actually involved the SSP and multidimensional consciousness and all of this crazy experience that went on for weeks and weeks, right?
Uh-huh.
So I completely understand what you're saying when you because when it turns on, you can't shut it off, right? And you have to try to explain it to somebody, but nobody's going to get it because you're just putting it together, like you were saying.
So what was interesting for me is that like I always somehow understood the line between like what I should talk about and what I shouldn't talk about, when I should talk about it, how much, right? Like it would, you know, I was very paranoid, particularly during the hard drug use years. I did not want people to know that I was on drugs. Like, even if they knew, I didn't want them to know, like, yeah, right now she's on drugs. Like, even if they knew ultimately that I had some sort of issue, like, for some reason, it was, it was a private something that I was in, right? And so,
Yeah.
like, I would, get into some of these ideas or headspaces, when I was on drugs, and then I would really think them through once I was sober before I might try to talk about it. But it wasn't until I stopped doing them altogether that like I found a way to talk about these things with people where it was almost just like an offering and it was kind of entertaining and they didn't feel like they were being hit over the head with it. Like during the drug years, even though I knew like kind of if I talked about this thing, I'd sound crazy, but this other stuff, it's like because I'm smart, I can explain it a way that they're not going to think I'm crazy, even if they're like not really interested. I everything was like hammer nail. I hadn't found like an artful way to present it. I didn't seem humored by it. I seemed either obsessed with it or bothered by it, depending on which information it was. And so it was really for me, and I think the two things kind of happened simultaneously. Once I'd say maybe in like the last year or two before I got clean, when I was really thinking about it and starting to make some changes in my life, like I started to practice how I wanted to present I knew that if I was going to stop doing drugs, I had to be able to talk about all that stuff. I started really like experimenting with ways of presenting concepts to people. And then also when I would be in the drug space, whether it be the hard drugs or the psychedelics, I started thinking about while I was in the space, how am I going to talk about this when I'm not? I almost started to like, instead of just like having all the information and chaos and noise going off in my mind, which sometimes like that's all I wanted to do was just like immerse myself in that. I was like, no, wait, like what you're thinking, what you're looking at, how are you going to explain it? And to this day, that helps me to be able to present the ideas on shows because as I'm having the experience, I'm already thinking about how am I going to talk about this. I don't go so overboard that I'm not in the experience anymore, right? But I don't just like take it all in like candy anymore. I'm already thinking like, what can I do with this that is going to, push things farther for me in my pursuits in my normal life, right?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So you said that your awakening was SSP and multidimensional consciousness. Was this just a topic you were interested in, or were you having experiences or thinking you had experiences or
Well, what happened was I had a succession of nightmares that were to the point of like terrifying. Like I'm not ashamed. Like I actually pissed the bed one night. It was so bad. Like I was having these military experiences in a reality that seemed somewhat futuristic against giant reptiles. And like I was having death experiences 20, 30, 40 times in a night. Like, and it was absolutely terrifying. And I'd wake up screaming. My wife couldn't sleep beside me. And it was like almost like a Vietnam flashback that I was having, but it's like the most military service I've ever had in this reality is I was in air cadets when I was like 8 years old. So I know it's not that. So it's not some type of PTSD from this reality. And I'm like, I eventually ended up on typical skeptic and getting put under hypnosis. And it ended up turning out that it was an SSP memory, like some type of hijacking of consciousness that is a whole other congealed story. But what it actually led me to was the understanding it's like, okay, I am seeing and experiencing, and I was actually starting to get some visual overlay while consciousness until I finally wrapped my, well, while conscious until I finally wrapped my head around this. And it was like, wait, if I'm experiencing that stage of my reality when I'm resting my physical form here, that means I can tune into that frequency of another stage of my conscious existence. So if I can do that with that one, that means that's real and that's real and that's real. And each one of these are just stages of my consciousness or conscious existence in other densities, reality. I don't know how to
I
really word it,
I
but that's
I
what it led me to.
I have two questions, and then like maybe I can offer something that is a way to think about it that helps me. Can you tell me what Air Cadets is? Because we don't have that here. Maybe that's a Canada thing. What is Air Cadets?
It's basically like military junior. They teach you about how to fly planes. We actually went up in gliders and stuff like that, and they teach you like aerodynamics and how a plane works, and they teach you to march and salute and be a good little soldier.
And
And
did this happen
that was
like
the
at like a camp, like summer camp, or like a training camp, or where did this happen?
it was actually at a military building in Ontario, Canada, and you went there several times. Like I think you went 3 times a month, and then there'd be like you could go to camps, you could go to shoot. Like they taught us to shoot in the basement, right?
Hmm.
It was very strange, but yeah, it's like this
So
military organization for children.
so the reason that I ask is just because a lot of my strange memories from childhood come from summer camp, right? And the summer camp that I went to, as people who on this channel are well familiar with, but you're not, so I'm going to tell you and they can listen again. I went to a summer camp in Chatsworth, in the hills of Chatsworth, located right near the Manson Tunnel, right? Which is, basically like where he had his kind of cult living for a period of time, near Spawn Ranch. And there was movies filmed there and whatnot, but also Santa Susana Pass or Santa Susana National Laboratory, which was then owned by Rocketdyne and is now owned by Boeing, which is an interesting installation in the hills of Chatsworth, where a lot of unusual things have gone on the site of what's called Burrow Flats, which is where Indians used to live there, and a very important cave painting that I have chronicled many times on my shows is there that has some pretty interesting drawings as to what maybe Boeing or Rocketdyne might have been interested in there, right? What's interesting is I have a lot of memories from that period of time in my childhood that match up to like some of the points that people who think that they were in secret space program or whatever that match like the experience or like what the top it sounds very similar, but for me I never thought I was going to space. For me, I thought I was being exposed to something that was to try to make me think I was going to space. Now, to add another layer onto this, right? Andrew Basiago, who was one of the people who popularized this idea of traveling to Mars, right? He talked about both time travel, teleportation, and like space travel, right? He grew up in Chatsworth. He literally grew up just a few blocks from where I grew up, went to the same high school, and had similar sets of memories from the same locations that I do. Now, he deeply believes that he's been to Mars, that he's traveled back and forth in time. So I believe that he is being honest, but I believe that his perception of his memories are just different than my perception of mine. And summer camps and training camps and things like this I'm guessing you're about my age, maybe a few years younger. In the 70s, particularly, but even into the 80s, these kinds of summer camps were hotbeds for Project Talent and Gate. And even if it's just like exposing kids to strange situations, experiments, energy fields. I mean, literally, there are fusion reactors and particle accelerators and things in these locations. And so there are strange energy fields. And I've always thought that what they're really looking at is like which kid has which reaction to being exposed to this location. Some kids don't notice anything. Other kids like start talking about, having weird experiences outside of time. Some people get sick. I don't know if people have ever seen the TV series Dark, that does a really great job of explaining the multitude of responses that people can have to being exposed to radiation. And the location that I'm talking about in Chatsworth, there's been an ongoing radiation leak there since the 70s, right? So, something like air cadets, right, could be you could have had some strange thing happen that in a child's mind, like plays out in some way that sounds more fanciful than it really actually was. But because it never got resolved for you, that seems like something that might play back later, right? In the dream space or whatnot. Also, we live in frequency soup, right? And so there's all kinds of things going on. But the way that I think about these experiences now is more like frequency bands or dimensions, like stations on the radio. We have one radio, and you can tune into like a multitude of stations. And sometimes the two stations blur. Sometimes you're hearing songs or noise from two different stations, and that's confusing as well, right? And also, sometimes drugs or light or sound or other stimulating, activities or experiences act as like the key to a specific frequency band or to that station on the radio, right? So, your thoughts?
Yeah. Oh, you hit on a few things there. And first of all, I'm going to tell you how interesting this is about to get because I grew up 25 minutes from Chatsworth, Ontario.
Oh, I didn't even know there was a Chatsworth, Ontario. I know there's Chatsworth House in England, and I know there's Chatsworth, Georgia, but I didn't know there's a
Yeah.
Chatsworth, Ontario. That opens up a new can of worms for me. My mind is already going racing on that one. Okay, tell me about it.
So it is just a small town, but it just the name kind of stuck out. And one of the other things I wanted to get into was you were talking about summer camp experiences. Here's where it gets really kooky when you were talking about the GATE programs and all of that. Is my sister is a professional educator. She was an A student from like grade 1 to grade 12. Boom, right? I was the quintessential Bart Simpson C, maybe D, even failed a grade, right? Was never the good student. In grade 4, I almost won the science fair. And in grade 5, I got invited to the provincial thinking symposium, right? This provincial thinking symposium was held at a church summer camp, which was 8 minutes from a military base. I remember the bus ride there and the bus ride home, and the rest, I have like one memory of being like the smart kid, and the rest is blank
Mm-hmm.
for like 8 hours.
Yeah, we live in a reality where, and this goes against like a lot of conspiracy lore where people think that like the government and the elite want to kill us or get rid of us and reduce the population. I disagree. But there was a time I believed that, and then I observed reality for long enough to know that the what government or the whatever, whoever the fuck, whatever, they see us as resources. And the thing that they're most interested in is our perspective and our genetics, right? And especially they especially love having access to it when we don't know. They like us to think we're sort of like meaningless and just a speck of sand on a large, beach or whatever. And maybe even it's okay if we think that the elite or the government wants to kill us or whatever it is. But like secretly, they're really, really fascinated with how individuals experience reality, perceive reality, react to certain situations, and not just because they're interested in developing psychological profiles on everyone, though they are, right? More because as I'm sure we can get into, I know you wrote an interesting like article that I read and it was part of what, made you want to have this conversation with me. They are really, really interested in our genetics and in how our each individual's like cocktail responds to external stimulus, to information, to energy fields, to other operators in the field, right? both in terms of like our energy, but also in terms of our perception, both intellectually, information, and then literally how we see things. Because the eyes are a really important part of quote mind control or all of this sort of stuff. They're very, very interested. There's like a really good movie called Eye Origin. I don't know if you've ever seen it. That kind of gets into it. But the eyes have been studied as part of mind control as far back or farther than Egypt, and certainly in, Nazi era Germany. That's something that they were really interested in, were people that had central heterochromia. And so, it's not a um, it's not a hierarchical or like, oh, this person is special or something like that, right? Which is part of like when MK Ultra started to become popularized in the early 2000s, there was all of this. These people have special talents. These people have Rh negative blood. They're special or whatever it is, right? And that felt like a red herring or a canard to me. It's like each person's got a different thing going on, and maybe the key to a different room or the access point. Oh, of course you have it, right? The DNA or what's going on with each one of our the pupils and irises of our eyes are like keys to different rooms in the hotel, and each room in the hotel has different books on the shelf and different sort of data stored within, right? The era of big data is really about the data that is being stored in our DNA, in our genetics, in our bodies, in our memories, in our mind, right? It isn't really about what's on our computer. That's just how they measure what our awareness of ourselves are at this point. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I would love to know like what got you, because I do want to get into the data storage stuff, but what really pushed you down that rabbit hole, we'll say, right? Because I know for me it was the most random question. Another podcaster asked me if I thought it was a simulation. And trying to figure out the biomolecular construct of our reality is where I fell into it. So I'd love to know what brought you there.
So interestingly enough, like the interest in DNA for me came really early on in psychedelic, not like the earliest. Like my earliest psychedelic experiences were with MDMA and LSD, and then a little bit later with mushrooms. But in the beginning, with all the psychedelics, I was going to raves, I was breakdancing in the circle, I was like partying and having fun with friends, and I did notice like the early time, when I started doing LSD, that there was like a very like psychological, analytical aspect to it. Sure, it made things look kind of cool. But it wasn't until like probably like a year or two into playing with mushrooms that I stopped like engaging in the more external part of that and really started to go into the internal part of the trip. And for me, it was in very stimulating environments with techno music and big sound systems and light shows and visual shows sometimes. But I wasn't that interested in like the external thing. I was closing my eyes and starting to notice that there was like this whole other show on the back of my eyes. And very early on, I would see just kind of the same things over and over. And it was usually like mandalas, sacred geometry, Egyptian stuff, and DNA. And so I would like come home from parties and want to see those things again. And I didn't know much about any of those things at that time. So like I would type in search terms. I didn't even know the term mandala or sacred geometry. I would like type in a description of what I thought I saw, and typed in DNA. So I started looking at DNA art and things like that. And for me, those things were all connected, right? Techno music, psychedelics, DNA, symbolism, sacred geometry. Like I would kind of, they were all clustered for me. Eventually I got to the place like where I even started to consider, and I haven't thought about it for a long time until just a few years ago. I started really thinking about it again. I remember considering, and that's why I have the avatar I do on YouTube, that what if DNA was actually like a psychedelic drug? What if like early on in, sort of the evolution of humanity, that like so we took something, or we had some sort of experience that fundamentally changed us, and like we've been tripping this experience of being human since then, right? So I started, like, I always kept looking for stuff like that, right? And then, a couple of years, I started to have really advanced visuals that continue to this day. They became, beyond anything I've ever seen on like a real visual show. There's starting to be some art that looks at the level of what I see behind my eyes, but and there's starting to be some mapping shows and things at parties that look kind of similar. But like a couple of years ago, I had a really interesting trip at a party. I took like a different mushroom than I'd ever taken from somebody, right? Like somebody like made a point of wanting me to take this specific mushroom, and I don't know what to make of that, but I took it. And it was different. It wasn't dry, and it didn't taste like feet like most mushrooms do. I put it in my mouth, and it like kind of disappeared. It was almost like cotton candy or something. And my whole trip that night, like when I would close my eyes, I was literally watching like DNA, like DNA be like written or like doing stuff. It was like dancing. It was responding to the like I was watching it on the back of my eyes, and it was very correlated to like the music and certain points, and I was watching how it does different things, and I realized that it's like some kind of like light language that is controlled by sound, right? So it's like some kind of antenna or receptor, right? That like it behind my eyes, it was like glowing in this way. It was like lit up, right? It was doing all kinds of interesting things, but it was very much being controlled by the sound. And I came back and did like a whole show on this. I did a couple of shows, I think, about, this experience I had with the DNA language, and it really started me kind of down the rabbit hole as far as like the connection between psychedelics and DNA. And then I started to look into the connections between nuclear fusion or fusion and DNA. And that was when these sort of ideas really started to take off for me. And at this point, it's obvious to me that our DNA is like how we there's like an external reality, and then there's an internal reality, and like the DNA is like the tool that we sort of use to kind of interface with this like sort of hologram or projection that's between it. Like we're producing something, something's coming out at it, and like we're tuning it through that, right? I'm sure you've done mushrooms before, haven't you? So like
Yeah.
one of the things that I notice with mushrooms is like they're what they are in reality, like all the different fancy healthy mushrooms like cordyceps and lion's mane and all that stuff, they're adaptogens, which means that they like do whatever your body needs them to do when people take medicinal mushrooms. Psychedelics are kind of like psychedelic mushrooms for me are kind of like that. I find that they tune audio for me. So if I'm somewhere that doesn't have great sound, once I take mushrooms, it's almost like the mushrooms adapt the sound to something that is tolerable to me. It also extends my hearing like a really far way out. Like I remember being at a party, deciding for some reason right after I had taken the mushrooms that I wanted to go home. And so I went, it was weird. Like I just felt, I don't know, I just felt like I need to go home for some reason. I went home, which was about 3 miles from where I was at the party, and I laid on my couch and I could hear the music at the party from my couch, right? And so I started to look up like mushrooms and sound and genetic sound, and I found all these interesting videos with like electronic music being made out of mushrooms and whatnot. But I mean, I was clearly hearing the music, right? So there is something. Our DNA seems to be some kind of antenna or receptor or something like that. And then I think that like psychedelics just stimulates it a little bit. And different people's radio or antenna is tuned to different sounds, right? Like we all have, some people think my music is horrible, but like when I hear the music that I like the way I start dancing brings information from the other realms in, right? And if I go listen to other music, it doesn't do that for me, right? So we're all tuned to a different frequency, different set of frequency bands. And then there are tools, and not all tools have to be psychedelics, right? There's like a lot of others. Sometimes just by dancing for a length of time, you can tune into that. A good sound system can do it. Certain kinds of breath work, lots of different ways of being stimulated. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what got me. Like, I was always interested in the DNA thing from those early trips back like 20 years ago. And then, when I had that one really meaningful one, I just started to research more about the connection between sort of quantum, computing, nuclear fusion, genetic engineering, and where our world seems to be going in terms of augmented reality.
I love where you're going with that, and I want to pick your brain on this one. If I'm understanding what you're saying, and it's pretty much what I believe as well, is that in some type of way we are projecting our reality as we are experiencing it, as we are living it, because we're receiving information through frequency, and it has a lot to do with our DNA. Do you think that that's why they're essentially trying to reprogram our DNA? Because long story short, at the end of my paper, I figured from the research from all the way back to the 40s, the governments of the world have figured out that we can store 13.8 billion years of digital information in the average human body, which is the approximate age of the universe, right? Known age. So to me, that's like, okay, we are literally the ones who contain all of the information. We're projecting it into real time because each one of us has a small microcosm of all of the information that exists throughout reality, right? And what I'm getting at is, because we have that ability to project into reality, do you think that's why they're trying to reprogram our DNA so we will be creating the reality they want?
So, I mean, I think there's many things going on simultaneously, right? So it was very, very clear to me early on, like in the pandemic, like probably by like May, right? That like really this was about that like it was really as much or more about the testing as it was about the pokeroonies, right? And that they were interested in collecting as much genetic material as they could from as many people as they could. And at the time, like I didn't know exactly why, right? I had a few different ideas. Like one of the things that I was toying with at that time was that they were looking for people who had the ability to sort of shift their blood type or shift their some of their like, there's something about their genetics, right? Like I have had this really weird thing, and I know a few other people that have had this, and all of them have the exact same thing as me. I'm not going to say exactly what it is, but I'll give you an example so you know what I mean. I had one blood type when I that I recall from when I was a kid, and then now my blood type is different. And I've met a few other people with the same situation, and they had the same blood type I did when they were younger, and it changed to the same blood type that mine changed to. So I was curious as to whether this was a phenomena that was going on, like something had been done to our environment or to our fucking food, or had we been injected with something that made that happen, right? Or was it something that some people's bodies were doing naturally to evolve, like because to avoid some issue that was coming? Some like, we live in this toxic soup, and a lot of people have a lot of health issues, and maybe if your body is able to do something like that insulate. I didn't know. I was playing with all kinds of ideas, right? And I also was of the opinion that they were looking for a needle in a haystack, that there was something they were looking for. And so they were going to, really extended lengths to try and find it. And then later, when things became more about the poke, my questions started to be, well, like, what is this? Is this like, are they trying to put in like a leash, right? Like, are we about to, like, are we moving into a time period where it's going to become obvious that you can move through dimension and move through time, and it's going to be really difficult to control people? And so, if you, it's like putting an electric collar on a dog, right? Or is it introducing something to the bloodstream or to the body that would be like, when they go to a crime scene and they spray luminol and then everything glows? Like, I wondered if, like, oh, like, will there be something in your body that if you have traveled outside of your normal domain temporally or dimensionally, then it'll show up, like you'll glow, right? So I played with that idea. And then, once I had that experience that I mentioned at the party, actually, that may have come after I'd already started digging into this connection. I for some reason, got very obsessed with the idea that nuclear fusion and DNA were connected. And I don't, so I started doing a lot of research, and pretty early on in the research, I'm like, oh, duh, how did I miss this, right? Like, the most amount of our DNA is in the nucleus of the cell. So, of course, there's a connection between like nuclear and DNA. And of course, we have the new, I felt dumb for like not having caught that earlier, but then that sort of shifted the research to looking at things. And I went down some pretty interesting rabbit holes. And then one day I found this article that I brought back up because when I knew I was going to talk to you today. I found this article. Let me pull it up so I can show you. Where did it go? Here it is. While I was researching fusion and DNA, I found this interesting article, right? DNA may be the key to unlocking fusion power. And what was really interesting about this time period is someone in my family who I had always felt was connected to nuclear fusion, but there had been like a denial around that. Suddenly there was a bunch of information available that proved exactly, what I suspected about this person. They had passed, and there was a lot more information available. And in fact, these very kinds of fusion were stuff that he had worked on. So I read this article, and this article is really interesting. When the show when it's done, I'll put the link to the article. Unfortunately, you have to like sign into Medium with Google or be a member or something to read the whole thing. But you might be able, I don't know, sometimes they let you read it once for free. Um, this article was talking about using custom strands of DNA in order to, because they are very good at um, creating like the nucleic acids and proteins, like, are good for coding to create carbon lattice nanotube structures, and those are superconductive. And part of the problem with fusion is the amount of energy needed to cool the fusion reactors negates the benefit of the amount of energy that they're producing. But if they were able to find a way to have room temperature or even hot temperature superconductivity, then suddenly it would be able to unlock all of this extra over unity energy. And it just so happens that some DNA codes for these very perfectly crystalline structured lattice nanotubes that may allow that to happen. And in fact, University of Virginia School of Medicine and is working on it, and they're thinking that they're going to be able to possibly power magnetic confinement tokamak plasma fusion reactors with this. And so it's not there yet, but that's the kind of technology that they're working on. And I found that, I think I found it in 2023, even though it was written at the end of 2022. I think I found it in early 2023. And then I realized, oh, this is the era of technology that we are going into, is technology that is dependent on, and not it, like we all know about like synthetic biology and all of that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about quantum computing, fusion reactor, all this kind of stuff dependent on our biology and genetics, where like something from the human is going to be powering the next generation of technology that, crosses a lot of borders and boundaries. And when I say that, I'm not talking just about, oh, they want technology in your body, though there's certainly interest in that. I'm talking about being able to transport packets of information, quantum transportation. I'm talking about, really high end. I'm talking about like individual augmented realities that don't require wearing a headset. I'm talking about like, portal magic, time, like timeline jumping, all kinds of stuff. That I think what's going to happen is the most economic and efficient and probably just best way to do it is going to be, with the human resources. And so I decided that rather than be so offended by that idea that I bury my head in the sand, I was like, I don't know, there's something about that that might be kind of cool, especially if I understand it. If we understand it, it's a lot harder to weaponize against us. And so for me, the world really opened up with that.
That is absolutely fascinating. And I've been like scribbling as you're talking, so I'm just trying to pick out which is the most prevalent that I want to bring up here. Um, just one thing that you made me think of there when you were talking about like advances in technology and you mentioned MK Ultra earlier. I'm just gonna side squirrel here for a second and then I'll go back to the gene stuff. Did you happen to see, I know you're not on social media much, they are now advertising that they can single out one person in an audience and put music directly to them.
Yeah, I
It
mean, yeah, this has been, I've been aware of this technology for a long time, partly just because I've been to, at this point, several hundred, probably over 1,000 electronic music events. And some of the parties that I attend deep in the underground bowels of Los Angeles, I live in Austin, but most of my music stuff is in Los Angeles, are at the cutting edge of experimenting with sonic alchemy, light technologies. Like, I mean, sometimes people hear me talk about it and they're like, whatever. And then I take them and then they're like, oh, fuck, right? You weren't kidding. And so like, I have had enough experiences at parties where my experience was so completely different than a person standing right next to me. But there will be like one or two, a few little crossovers that like I've been aware for a long time that that can be done just through the sacred geometry of space, time, and sound. It doesn't necessarily have to be some spectacular special device, though whenever some sort of effect is achieved, then people immediately start looking for efficient ways to replicate it over and over and over, smaller technology, more control, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think that we're like I also think that there's many levels to this technology, right? There's like most people are there, they're at the show or they're at the party, and their sort of consciousness is mostly focused on the most obvious things. But once you've been to hundreds and hundreds of parties and these kinds of places, you start to pay attention to different things going on at different levels and different layers. And I think a lot of these events can actually be a way of cloaking something deeper going on within, like like a Russian nesting dolls of sonic experiences and whatnot. And I've seen and experienced some pretty out there interesting stuff. And so at this point, I prepare to go to parties more like I used to prepare to go for gymnastics competitions, right? Because like it is more like that, right? The more sort of physically prepared you are for the stimulating situation, the more likely you're going to have a coherent experience. If you're a mess, it might be a mess, or you might just miss it completely, right? Like you might literally, like I think there's people who sometimes like completely miss out on like the portal that just opened and the person that popped through right next to them because they're just fucked up or they're whatever it is, right? Parties are a great
Um,
place, right? There's a plausible deniability for everything because so much chaos, people on drugs, all that kind of stuff, right? So,
yeah, I love that you brought up a portal because I'm going to share a party story. I actually took our teenage son to his very first auditorium concert, and we went and saw Godsmack. And one of the opening bands started a mosh pit, but he started a circle mosh. And I actually have the video, and you can pick it up on the audio of him screaming, "Open a fucking portal," as people are opening and it's like, I didn't even realize I had caught it until I got home and started watching the videos. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. It's in a mosh pit. And then you listen to the audio and the lead singer screams, "Open a fucking portal." And I'm like, oh my God, right in your face. Like, really?
I mean, if you like, if you dig into people who are really advanced with sound, and whether that be the actual musicians themselves, or really in a lot of cases, it's more like the sound engineers or people who do the lighting. A lot of these people have a lot of esoteric knowledge. They're very well aware of that you can do these things, right? And sometimes they're done with intention, and other times it's just happenstance. These things happen. But yeah, I mean, we are like, I want to say we're at the precipice, but a lot of this has actually been going on for a long time. But at this point, it's just become more ubiquitous. There's more opportunities for it, and it's more like anybody who is, anybody who's willing to sort of experiment with their consciousness and do some sort of research. And the biggest thing is just like paying attention, not writing off the situations that feel like, oh my God, that was kind of crazy. Yeah, that must be my imagination. Like if you pay attention to how you're feeling when stuff changes, like at this point, like I can feel when I'm about to have some kind of weird experience, and then it's like I'm paying attention. I've become very good at sensing that something is coming, paying attention, and then looking for like the thing that is creating the experience. Like where is it? Like what is happening? Where is the like scaffolding or the particle or the point that the sound or the light is hitting to create the opening, right? And once you've sort of identified those spots, then you start to see who else is aware of them and like what's going on, how you can use them, should you use them. And like sometimes the answer is no. Like sometimes it's like, I'm just going to watch that and I'm not going to go near it, but I'm going to continue watching because it's interesting. And other times it's like, it's not even a question. It's just like, you're like, "Oh, okay, like I just had a, sort of a, a a transcendent experience. And when I say transcendent experience, I don't necessarily mean like in the more spiritual sense, though I've certainly had that as well. But like literally, I was in one place and now I'm in another, right? Like a crossing the threshold kind of experience. And I think it's an exciting thing about there's lots of things about what's going on with science and tech that are not exciting really sounding, especially like some of the people who are in charge, and whatnot. But there's also some really cool stuff happening, right? And sometimes like I took my girlfriend to a party in Los Angeles, and she's the type that maybe gets nervous in those kinds of environments sometimes. So she was a little hesitant, but like once she kind of settled in, she was like, "Oh no, this is actually cool. Like I felt fine there. Like these people are all really here because they love this music and they like the same information and topics that we do, and this is a place to go and like geek out on it, right?" So
Yeah, that actually is kind of intriguing. I wouldn't mind going, but I think the artificial knee and my age might be beyond that. So yeah. Um, I just want to go back a bit when we were talking about where they're looking for certain things in genetics and certain things. I'm not even going to beat around the bush. Do you think that they have throughout in history had like family tracking and people inserted into certain bloodlines to alter the outcome of that family's path? It I've seen some very archetypal things about some families recently that I've been just observing, and
Mhm.
it's like, wait, that is the exact same as this, right? There's something to the fact that everything's working in a pattern, but do you think the government or whomever does insert other people or track certain families' genetics?
Okay, so like sure, like I think this goes like well beyond government. Like I think like government is just a management system on something for the situation we find ourselves in. But yes, like, I think that oh, you know, secret societies, certain tribes and clans that go back thousands of years, right? That it's part of their tradition, part of their, like, I'm sure there's like, dark, light, different kinds of indigenous. I think there's a million different ways that this is being done, right? Now, some of it is about like the location you grew up in, and some of it is about some, secret cabal of powerful and everything in between or whatever it is. But I think that they, have kept a tradition of being able to sort of choreograph or plan their reincarnation so that they're able to carry the 13.8 billion years worth of like it's all of us have it, but most of us aren't aware of it, right? But it does seem that there are some people that are really well able to tap into prior knowledge, advanced, understanding of ancient mysteries and things like that. So I do think that there are groups that have cultivated and curated and worked on this process, right? And that they are, and it's funny when you see like, oh, there was like a guy 200 years ago that looks just like Jay-Z or Justin Timberlake or whatever it is, right? But, they think there is some of that stuff. I also think that it's a lot of this is a spiritual science. So there's a science component and a spiritual component. I don't see those things as separate, though they would like us divided into the, spiritual people and the science people and have everyone at each other's throats. I think that just like if you put, you know, two chemicals together in the petri dish, there's a reaction. Like it's the same thing with people, right? Like I think what bloodlines are obviously, specific genetic sequences and all of that kind of stuff, but also different people have different trace elements in their blood. And those elements are, funny enough, the same elements that are involved in things like fusion and fission and particle reactions and all of this kind of stuff. And I think that, at a very high level, things like arranged marriage are really about mixing this with that in order to create something that is more. And so if you have something in your bloodline that, like you want to maintain, then you don't want to mix it with something that is going to cancel it out, right? But you might want to mix it with something that is going to amplify it or create something that is bigger, better, badder, more, whatever it is, right? So, I think that there's probably different psychologies about this. And some people are like, okay, well, like we have something that's better than most people, so let's just keep it to ourselves. And others are like, well, we have some good stuff, but these people over there, they have good stuff too. And I bet you if we mix this with that, right? I think that you know, like I have this, weird story about, my mom, her dad was definitely Mason, right? And I have this suspicion that like there's some groups, some secret societies, or some sects of Masonic orders that like use the periodic table as like a way um, to sort of cast their child as like a specific character that's there representing an element on the periodic table. And it's like having a secret gang sign flashing to the other people who are in the know that like my daughter is Ruthenium, who is your son, right? And my mom's name is Ruth Ann Moyer. She was born in 1944. Ruthenium is element 44 on the periodic table. Ruthenium is a superconductor. She married my father, who was not like, she was supposed to go to Stanford, and her dad was like, he wanted her probably to marry someone that was in their sort of Masonic or religious reality. But my mom wanted to go to UCLA, which he thought was the Little Red Schoolhouse. But somehow she got hooked up with my dad, and they decided that was okay. Because I think my dad is 88 on the periodic table, which would be radium. And if you take 44 and 88, that's 132, or 32 plus 1 is 33. Like, I think that might be how they work some of this. I don't know. It's just a story I tell. But I had an interesting, like, I've always known this, but I just put this together recently as well. I was born at 4:40 in the morning, and my mom always woke up at 4:40 to go to work. She like had a job she had to commute far to. So there's this like reinforcing of the 44, right? Almost like this is the most important thing to maintain of that sort of bloodline, right? So I think that there's an advanced level of alchemical knowledge, and they know that's what like, obviously like some people have to, arrange marriages, but, because they're trying to find enough kids to work the farm, and this family has more resources and whatever. That's a thing in like India or, some cultures. But I think in these advanced sort of mystery school kinds of cultures, it's really more about understanding what things will make something more, will cause a chemical reaction that is like a live wire or a spark that will bring something new into existence. Or maybe it's about like catalyzing a spark that the spirit can identify on the way in, right? Like you have to create an action, like a certain kind of reaction for like that spirit that's out there, trying to decide which body they're going to come into to sort of see. Also, I don't know if you've seen any of these you could like they can make different DNA play music, right? Like everyone's DNA makes a different song, right? And so if you're listening for like a frequency, it'd be there they are, right? This one, right? Because it's like A, C, G, it's like music, right? Like the DNA that what the DNA, codes are and things. So I don't know. These are just like ideas that I spitball with. But I think that at this point, everyone's all mixed together pretty much. I mean, there are a few small pockets of the world where there hasn't been a lot of integration or immigration or anything like that. But at this point, it's more like, what can we create with this sort of fusion meal of everything that we have here, right? And new combinations are popping up all the time, right? And what portal? I mean, wouldn't it be really interesting if like if we each have our own portal, right? Everyone or maybe it's not even we each have our own portal. Like we each have our own frequency band, right? We exist here, but we also have like our own private frequency band. And the way that we get there is like finding the right thing to sort of combine our energy with to like catalyze that. So maybe you go to a location that has a lot of some mineral in the ground, and then that's where you have people who are like, I slipped into another dimension and I was gone for 4 hours and then I was back. Or, maybe it's like, you have a romantic connection with somebody who has like that perfect thing for you to connect with to, open up space outside of time, and you guys have this amazing, artistic connection, whatever it is. There's a million ways it can play out. But I think it is not a mistake that at the same time that all of this other chaos has been going on, that this weird thing happened with Ancestry and 23andMe, where like they're going to allow the companies as they're being sold to like sell off everybody's genetic data, right? Like DNA, genetic data is the new oil, right? This is what people want. And so these technologies and these strange experiences are going to become more and more frequent, right? They really did a good job between, the commercials where like you could find out that your uncle liked to dance in an Irish kilt or a Scottish kilt or whatever, and freaking people out about COVID or whatever, at getting quite a lot of people to donate their genetics. So like even if you haven't, for sure, and probably people in your family have, and they can get, pretty close to stuff and whatnot. And people always talk about genetically targeted weapons, and of course that exists and that will exist, but I don't really think that's the point. I think they're really much more interested in this: what else can we learn? What else can we know? And can we know it without them knowing? Right? Like, that's the big thing, is like which individuals can take you to the most places and show you the most things without being aware that they have done that. And I feel like that's the fantasy for them, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. They do think that we are just kind of docile creatures roaming through life, and they're just kind of puppeteering, and we have no idea. But something, and I put a big star beside it because you triggered something while you were talking about the periodic table and how they mix elements into people. Something I just learned about recently too that is no longer on the standard periodic table is that each element has a resonant frequency that used to
Yep.
be listed on the periodic table. So exactly as what you're saying, that if I mix this element and this element, then it would have a resonant frequency of this, and that would be able to control, change, alter. It really is about the frequency of these elements that they're trying to combine.
Have you looked into Walter Russell at all? Have you ever seen
No.
Walter Russell's periodic table? Oh, you're going to love this. I love showing people this for the first time. Here we go. This is Walter Russell's periodic table. And he has each of the elements correlated with octaves, with frequencies, with colors. So there's a few different iterations of it, but like this one is one of my favorite ones here, right? Let's see if I can make it big, right? So each of the elements is either male or female, right? It's like charging systems, discharging systems, ninth octave, eighth octave, seventh octave, right? And then there's like, here's another one that is pretty good that has the different colors. Everything is associated with a sound, a tone, right? And then like being either electric or magnetic. He's really into like electromagnetism. And so either male or female. There's a couple of other versions of it. Like this was an interesting, like you can look at it like head on or spread it out, right? He has a really hard book called The Universal One, right? That gets into a lot of this. But yeah, I love looking his periodic table, and it gets to kind of what you're talking about. He has it correlated with harmonics, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
And I have to look at that.
I do a show about the periodic table with my friend Chris Miner. It became like I have a long running series called Playing the Glass Bead Game that started with Michael Wan, and it was about like really finding the interconnectedness of all things and synchronicity. It was inspired by the book The Glass Bead Game by Herman Hesse. And then, once Michael and I were kind of done with that, it kind of took on a new iteration when I started having all of these insights about DNA and nuclear physics, and I was very interested in the periodic table. I've always thought that the periodic table is like an index for something else as well. And it's taken us like 2 years to get through the first two pillars, or not even through the second pillar of the periodic table. Each element is a fucking trip, dude, right? And one of the things that Walter Russell said is that the elements are not substances. They're the conditions that give rise to the substance. So when you have a certain harmonic, like when you have a certain frequency going, this material will appear. And we call that material this thing or that thing or whatever it is. But that it's all comes from the same thing. It's the conditions that made it into what it was type of thing, right? And so like I don't like we our understanding like that we got from when we were little kids of the periodic table is wrong, right? But so I'm not saying that like, oh yes, the periodic table is the ultimate. I think there's a lot of problems with it, but what's so crazy about a lot of these elements is like a lot of the elements, like when they discovered them, they didn't even have any. Like there was nothing. Like they didn't go and find some sample and determine that it was this. Some of them literally, like while they were experimenting with another element, something that they did to the element turned it into another element or created a byproduct of an element, right? And if they couldn't, or if they knew an element existed in nature, but it's like too rare or too hard to get to, they would like find another way to make it, right? So that tells us a lot about this place that we're in. And that, I mean, that's obviously like with alchemy, turning like lead into gold or water into wine. Like you can make I'm not going to say you can make anything else, but you can make lots of things something other than what you think they are. And sound, light, and resonance frequency, that's how it's done.
I completely agree. Like I've been trying to wrap my head around like, the theory is simple. Like if I could change the vibration of my molecules, because each one of us is just so many billion atoms, right? And they all vibrate at a frequency, and mine just happened to make Dawn, and yours happened to make Emily, right? And we're just exactly what you're explaining. We're all just vibrating. If you could figure out how to mentally control the rate of that vibration, then you could also start to manipulate reality and pass
Yep.
through things, pass things towards you. And I think that's something that we have forgotten how to do, or
Yes.
used to know how to do, or are going to remember how to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right, right? Like, I mean, I think part of how, um, it's about understanding how to sort of like disassemble and reassemble yourself, right? Like type of thing. And I think a lot of it is if there's something that is vibrating a certain way and you can find a way to match that, then you can be there or you can be that. It's kind of like the electronic music is a great metaphor for so much stuff, but like how DJs mix is they beat match, right? Like they're playing one track and then they want to bring in another track and make it sound like it's kind of like all one song. And the way you do that is you find a way for the beats to line up with one another. Like there's so much about reality that is like that. And it's you can do this with breath work, with yoga, with meditation, with consciousness, with exercise, with drugs, with music, with light, all of this kind of stuff. And I think it's about there's a lot of great. Have you seen this show Dark Matter on Apple?
No, no,
Right? Like it,
no.
it's basically, they create this technology that when you use it with the drugs, that you can travel to an endless number of iterations of the same place and whatnot. But what it really is just kind of like this sort of balance between what you're doing with your physiology and what's happening with your consciousness, and one can block the other. Your consciousness may be ready to go, but if your physiology isn't, then that could create an issue, and vice versa, right? Like we have a really strong idea of what we think the world is, and who we think we are and where we think we are, and that's actually strong enough to hold that in place most of the time. But if you can sort of relax that gaze or that awareness, like simultaneous to sort of vibrating yourself into a specific frequency, then you can go and you can come back, or maybe you don't come back, but maybe that's okay, right? Like I've had some parties where I not sure that I left in the same reality that I entered the party from. But like I am enough myself that like I could be comfortable with whichever version of myself I landed in, right? Yeah.
That that really makes sense to me because I've had similar experiences where it's like, did I just shift? What the hell just happened? So no, I absolutely get what you're talking about. And I just had like a huge brain wipe. Um, I will go back to my paper. Oh, something else that you and Steven talked about, and I was fascinated with your take on it and wanted to get into, was what I'll call the misnomers in mental illness,
Mhm.
right? You were talking about people with dementia and Alzheimer's, and this is something that strikes particularly close to home because my wife's father had dementia. Both of my grandmothers had Alzheimer's. So it is something I've been on this side of the experience of, but I'd love to get your breakdown on it and go from there because what you said on Steven's show really resonated with my understanding of it as well.
So, first of all, I think we should pay close attention to the fact that they call it dementia, right? And we're talking about, oh, do we live in a multidimensional reality? So, like, these things are not accidental. Yes, they spell it differently and whatnot, but these thoughts come from like a couple of different things. So, first of all, like my mom did die of dementia, right? And it's very interesting to watch a person go through that. I also have like a great aunt that was the first person in the United States to die of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called mad cow disease, which is like a
Oh,
very accelerated form of dementia. And some of the things that were going on with her, I remember hearing about this, some of these things that was like, wow, that is like that didn't feel like we have an idea in our mind when you first hear of Alzheimer's when you're a kid or when you the first time and you see somebody who they say has it and you don't know that person. So just whatever they're doing sounds crazy. But when it's somebody that you are familiar with their experiences and you're around them enough and you observe what they keep doing or keep talking about, like there's coherence to it. They are talking about something that they're experiencing in the same place that you are. You're not seeing what they're talking about, but they're talking about the same thing over and over and over. It's not just random, incoherent thoughts that don't make any sense, right? And, also from my time doing a lot of drugs, like I saw a lot of people have sort of psychosis and schizo kind of scenarios. And what was weird for me when I would see people do that is like I kind of knew what they were talking about. It wasn't like to me it was like whatever they were reporting on like wasn't bothering me as much as it was bothering them, but I could see it out of the corner of my eye, right? And so maybe it's there at a different sort of frequency. And I had like enough. I used to have like weird experiences when I was coming down from drugs more than like when I was like super high on meth. Like when I'd be coming down, right? Sometimes like I'd catch something like over here. And it's not like I was thinking about it before, or I was very bothered by it, but like I almost always noticed it at like a similar state of the experience, right? Almost just where there was like a blurring. Like maybe when I'm on sober, I was like in one frequency band, and when I was super high, I was in another. But like when I was in the in between space, I was like catching things from both spots. And it was the same things over and over and not things that I cared about. Like it wasn't stuff that like I was wanting or scared of. It was just like, why is that always there when this happens, right? And then, talking to other people with these experiences, like I don't think there's like all of these different worlds that are far away, either in time or in space. I think it's kind of like the movie, like everything everywhere all at once. And it's just which band you're tuned into, right? Which station on the radio that you have the dial turned to. And then there's sometimes some bleed over. And I think some people have a more expanded range, right? So I think that some people like can hear multiple stations at the same time, even if they're not like bleeding through, right? They can hear multiple stations at the same time. Maybe one of them they hear more like prominently and the other one is a little bit more recessed, or maybe they're hearing them both simultaneously, but they've been able to figure out like which one they're actually in and which one they're just aware of. And so I think that like we know this from like indigenous cultures. Sometimes some of these things that we call mental illness are actually like sacred conditions in some of those because they're how they get information about the area and the spirit realm. But I also discovered that there's a connection with schizophrenia and eyes. That a lot of time there is a correlation between people who have schizophrenia and who have some increased amount of lipid fat deposits in their eyes. And they don't know if the lipid fat deposits cause schizophrenia or the schizophrenia causes the lipid fat deposits, but there's a correlation, right? And there's also, if you get into looking into central heterochromia or other kinds of eye conditions, this has always been what like cults, mind control. There's always been a connection. Like there's the whole thing with like some of the Finders cult and some of the missing kids that they like the kids that have either regular heterochromia or central heterochromia. You can go the Mengele was interested in the women and children that had it. And a lot of what comes along with the multiple colors in the eye are spots on the eyes that are seemingly some sort of like grid or map for something. So I'm wondering, and I also learned of something that is in eyes called cryptochromes that Alison McDowell told me about, and she had sent me an article about it in birds, but then this also is something that can occur in humans. And this is pigmentation in the eye. You know how like you've heard of like Tyrian purple, or if you listen to Amon Hillman, he talks about the burning purple, some of these famous purple and blue dyes that like wars were fought over and whatnot. Well, imagine like that pigmentation inside your eye and it's like wearing, you know how like you can go to Sedona and wear those certain goggles and see the UFOs? It's like
Yeah.
that. Like, what if there's some pigmentation in people's eyes or like these fat deposits for some reason open up a visual band that most of us can't see, right? And so my mom had been a subject at she had gone to the same eye doctor for her whole life. She had some interesting eye condition, and she had been going to the same eye doctor since she went to UCLA as an 18-year-old until like he retired a few years before she died. And then at a certain point, she became a subject of Jules Stein Eye Institute at UCLA. And I think that the eyes have a lot to do both with mind control, but also with these conditions. And I think the conditions are we've pathologized them, and we call the people mentally ill, but what we should really probably be saying about a lot of them is like they can see shit that we can't. And if they can learn how to, we think that, oh, someone's seeing something that's not there. No, dum dum, they're seeing something that's there and you can't see it. Right. And if, just, that you've been into it like an environment before that's like overstimulating. And at first you're like, and then you get used to it and then you can function in it. Right. My
Yeah.
guess would be that, that these people are seeing stuff that is there, just like your cat, the shit your cat sees is there. Right. The cats have it. Some of the cats have really interesting eyes also. So it's there at different frequency bands, and some people are better able to order it and manage it, and others cannot, and they fall in, right? And I think a lot of the technologies that are coming around the bend, like coming down the pipe, are things that a lot of people are not going to be able to see with their normal eyes. But when they're on certain drugs, they'll be able to see them. So everyone will have like their own personal Pokemon Go that they can tap into with their microdose that will be supplied to them by their, doctor who's now into it or whatever it is. I think there's like a lot of that coming down the pike. But I also think that one of the things that may be what we're observing, the screen that the projection, both external and internal, are sort of meeting at, or that people are seeing, is the plasma field. Like 99.9% of the universe is plasma, and it is capable of doing computation and storing information. So it's like a giant digital brain or like an invisible computer that, does like a lot of the same stuff that we do or that computers and machines do, but it's like, it's not, it doesn't look mechanical, right? But my guess would be that it's kind of like, when you go into if you watch like the underwater stuff on Discovery Channel and you see like the like stuff down at the bottom of the ocean that has like bioluminescence or something. I
Yeah.
think that two things. I think for some people, they can see the glow on some of that plasma field. Sometimes it becomes obvious to lots of people, but I think some people can resonate with that and see that. But I also think that that is an information field that's like wanting to communicate on some level with people. And so if they're able to find, like I wonder sometimes if it clusters around certain energetic locations, whether those energetic locations be natural or whether they be like power plants or transformer stations or whatever. Like I saw some like weird, crazy shit outside of a lot of parties in LA are like in areas where there's power plants and transformer stations and things like that, which is interesting. But like I got to the party and everything was normal, and like later there was like these like secondary strange glowing structures, and I've been trying to unwind what that was, and I showed other people who took either no drugs or different drugs than me, and they saw it too. So it wasn't just me. But it literally looked like some sort of like not fully solid secondary structure that had arranged itself around the scaffolding of the power plant, right? And it seemed to be responsive to the amount of energy and the music and whatever it is. So imagine that. Like, imagine if some of these festivals and electronic music things or underground warehouse things are literally creating energy signatures that some of this other intelligence is attracted to, and creating like almost a way to communicate through that resonance, that signature that's being created. I don't know. But I think that like the stuff that people with some conditions are seeing, I think it's there and we just can't see it. Right. And I think that uh, as a society, we should take the responsibility of differentiating between people who are like different and people who are not well or something like that. Um, and I think that that's the next frontier. Like I don't think it's space. I do not think space is the next frontier. Right? I think it's plasma and schizophrenia and some of these frequency-based realities. Yeah.
And I love that you were talking about everywhere all at once because that actually gives me an opportunity to tell a quick grandma story. My mom's mom, before she got put into a home, which she did not last long in, when we got worried because she got that bad, but we didn't understand what was going on, right? My mom showed up to her apartment and my grandma was clutching a garbage pail with her slippers and everything. She was disoriented, but she was looking at my mom and I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. And my mom's like, "You're at your home." She's like, "No, my home in Meaford." Well, my grandma grew up in Meaford, right? She hadn't been there for many, many, many years. She thought, well, she was experiencing, now that I know, she was experiencing the time when she was 5 years old, but also was able to access the part of her brain where she knew who my mother was. So
Mhm.
she was essentially in separate times at once. There was the 4 or 5 year old child who was terrified because she didn't understand what was going on, and there was the senior citizen version who still knew who my mom was.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, some of these states are non-ordinary. I'm reading the programming and metaprogramming in the human biocomputer right now. That's the John Lilly book, and it's very interesting. Also, it goes pretty well with the television show I just watched called Severance, right? I kind of was doing them simultaneously. And Severance, though, like sort of stylistically you wouldn't think so. It's really honing in on some of the same things that we're talking about right here. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing I stumbled across via my wife, and it completely shifted my perception on it too, is like I have ADD and borderline personality disorder and all these wonderful labels that they've medicated me for my entire life. And, they use the phrase on the spectrum.
Uh-huh.
Well, you fuckers, don't you mean frequency, bitch?
Right.
Because there's the telepathy tapes, which is the kids focusing on autism who actually turn out to be psychic. Sorry for the spoiler. Like actually can read people's minds. And then I started looking at the range of these disabilities like attention deficit disorder, ADHD, all of these things. And it's like, no, these are varying scales of perception that other people don't have.
Well, I'm going to take you back to this. Like, right? On the
Yeah.
spectrum is a light spectrum, like a full color spectrum, right?
Oh,
And
shit.
it would, make sense to me if, people are, you know, that some of these spots on the spectrum, all of the spots on the spectrum correlate to some trace element that's in their body or in their blood, either through heredity or through environmental or toxic exposure, right? And that those elements correspond to a harmonic and to a color on the light spectrum, and that is where their consciousness is being activated, right? So again, like I think there's a lot of answers that can come from really understanding what it is he was trying to get at with this, right? I mean, because it's like literally like you can wind this up so it's circular, but it's almost like all these different little realities exist. Like we think we live in a carbon-based reality, but like what if there's a reality for each element on the periodic table, and all you have to do is know the frequency, the sound to play, or the light, the color of the light to shine, like on the pupil of the eye, or to hit the eardrum, or to make their DNA do a specific dance, and there they are. They're getting information from that realm, and we're calling it ESP or telepathy or intuition or whatever it is, but literally they are reading the field. That information is there, and if you can tune into it, you're reading it.
That is the best explanation I think I've heard thus far in my journey.
I do
Like
what I
that really hit home. I know you gave Steven a paradigm shift, and I think that was mine because I
can.
looked at it in that context.
All right.
Wow, you just okay. And on that note, I'm gonna thank you for this, and if you can please send me the link so I can download this, and I'm gonna cobble it
Yes.
together and try to make a video, and I'll do it on audio, and I'll send that to you as well. Um, so for my end of it, do you want to tell everybody where they can find you? Because it's going to be on Forbidden Knowledge Audio as well,
Sure.
and where they can find you, where they can find your links and all that wonderful stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, right. My YouTube channel is my name, Emily Moyer. I'm also at patreon.com/off planet media, emilymoyer.locals.com, and a small selection of stuff now on rockfin.com/Emily Moyer. I do lots of collaborations with many other content creators, Danny Katz, Nish, Les Luthor, Chris Miner. I have hundreds of hours with Michael Wan and Jeff Gates, and I've worked with a lot of, and I've started with Randy Moggins on Off Planet Radio. That's all still there on those channels. Long series with Robert Phoenix. So there's all kinds of things there. My website is emilycmoyer.com. I have lots of content. I also do nutrition consultations and storytelling. And yeah, reach out. Reach out if you have thoughts. If you'd like to hear them, I'm here. I will. I'll send you the video so you can post it on your own channel. And it looks like we had a good crowd in the chat room. So I don't know. So like, let's if anyone's there wants to ask a question or comment on anything or whatever, now's the time. You can give them. We can give the chat room a minute or two before we go if you want. And
Oh,
I'm
for
glad.
sure.
Go ahead. Yeah.
For
See if
sure.
anybody in the chat room have a question. I'm not good at reading the small print, so if you, which is weird because I have good vision, but I don't know, it's too many things to look at. But if somebody wants to ask a question or has a comment, all capital letters, and I'm happy to address it, or if it's for Don, then he can.
Yeah.
Thank you for the nice words, everybody. Dawn, it's been like really nice to get to know you. We can do it again sometime. And
Oh,
yes.
and I hope my setup's working a bit better. Like this is insane. The people that are listening to this on my channel will know I just got a very generous gift from another guest, and it was a whole new setup, and that's what crashed tonight. So I don't know what the hell is going on.
Well, my dad does call me Hurricane Emily. Sometimes when I blow in, the walls shake. So, all right, guys. We are gonna, yep, I think, so here, someone has a all capital. Asked earlier, but do you think meth tinkering are people building same thing without blueprint? Oh, okay, so are you saying that, are you wanting to know if people who do meth are tinkering with and building these sort of alternate dimension realities or sort of like subtle dimensional realities the same way that like the controllers or whatever are, but they just don't know exactly what they're doing without the blueprint? I think that's what you're asking. Yeah, I mean, I think, well, if not building them, certainly like touring them, right? Getting a sneak peek, all of that kind of stuff. And I do think that all of these like alternate, let's say that like, okay, we're all here, we're all agreeing that like we think we're pretty much in the same place, right? But there's all of these other sort of frequency bands that maybe are correlated with different substances, and some of them don't even have to be what we think about as drugs. They can be like this herb, that mushroom, this whatever it is, right? The people that spend the most time at each band contribute the most amount of artwork to the mural on the wall. So the more time you spend in those spaces, then parts of you start to show up there and you start to recognize the other people who spend time there, whether you're actually with those people or whether you're just admiring the art that they've left on the wall and that you're sort of sitting in the room with when you have your experiences. So yes, I don't know if we are building it or if we are decorating it or just sort of, adding to the vibe of the space or whatnot. But I think anybody who experiments with their consciousness and like does it with some level of attention or intention is part of that. Yeah. Hope that answered
I
your.
think
All right. I think that's all. I think that's all done.
awesome.
I had a wonderful time. Guys, thanks for being flexible and shifting over here with us. And
Yeah.
we'll see you again real soon. Dawn, stay here for a second. I'm going to end the live stream. Good night, guys.